Ethan Hale had always believed his life was simple, predictable, and built entirely on hard work. At 32, he had climbed from a junior analyst to a mid-level executive at Helix Corp, an $80 billion global tech empire known for its ruthless competitiveness and impossibly high standards. Ethan worked late nights, chased deadlines until sunrise, and survived on black coffee and willpower, all because he wanted to give his wife, Amelia, the future she deserved. At least, that's what he thought. Ethan never imagined that behind Amelia's gentle smile, her soft-spoken nature, and her shy way of tucking her hair behind her ear when she got nervous, she carried a secret so enormous it could shatter everything he believed about the world. But for now, Ethan was simply rushing home through city traffic, worrying because Amelia hadn't answered any of his calls or messages since morning. The last thing she'd said before he left for work was that she had a doctor's appointment, but she'd seemed unusually tense, barely eating her breakfast, her hand resting protectively over the slight curve of her stomach. She was 3 months pregnant, and Ethan was terrified of something going wrong. When he finally reached their apartment, he found the front door unlocked. His pulse spiked. Amelia never left the door open, not even once. He stepped inside slowly, calling her name, but the entire place felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then he heard the sound of Amelia crying softly in the bedroom. He rushed in, heart hammering, and found her sitting on the floor next to the bed, clutching a piece of paper in her shaking hands. Her eyes were swollen, hair messy like she'd been pulling at it. And the moment she saw him, she choked out his name and collapsed into his arms. Ethan held her tightly, fear gripping him so hard it almost strangled him. When she finally calmed enough to speak, all she said was, "I didn't expect it to happen this soon." But she didn't explain, not even when he begged. She only whispered, "You'll know everything soon," in a voice so hollow it chilled him. She asked him to pack a bag for her, saying she needed to leave the apartment for a while. She wouldn't say where she was going, she wouldn't say why. Ethan refused, insisting he was coming with her. But she shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks, saying softly, "If you come, everything will fall apart." Her words made no sense, and yet the fear in her eyes was real enough to silence him. When she left the apartment that evening, escorted by 2 unknown women dressed in black suits and speaking in strangely respectful tones, Ethan felt as if the ground had been ripped from beneath him. He tried to follow them, but one of the women stepped in his path and calmly said, "Mr. Hale, your wife is safe. She will explain everything when the time is right." Ethan demanded answers, but the woman only repeated the same sentence, like a programmed machine, before closing the car door behind Amelia and driving off. For the next 2 days, Ethan's life spun completely out of control. Amelia had vanished. No messages, no calls. Her phone was turned off. Her doctor wouldn't share any information due to privacy regulations. Ethan barely slept. He went to work only because staying home made him feel like he was suffocating. But work offered no comfort either. The minute he stepped into Helix Corp headquarters, he felt a tension in the air he couldn't explain. People whispered when he passed. His manager avoided him. His inbox was strangely empty. On the 3rd morning, while sitting at his desk pretending to work, he received an email that froze him cold. Report to the executive board, conference room. 10 a.m. sharp. That room was usually reserved for the highest level corporate decisions, mergers, acquisitions, legal crises, not mid-level employees like him. He arrived exactly on time and found 7 board members seated around a long obsidian table, each one with a file in front of them labeled with his name. Ethan's throat went dry. They stared at him like he was a problem they didn't know how to categorize. Finally, the stern older man at the head of the table spoke. "Mr. Hale, we have been made aware of circumstances surrounding your wife that require immediate disclosure." Ethan blinked, completely lost. What circumstances? The board members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting with a mixture of unease and fear. That alone made Ethan's skin crawl. Helix Corp feared very few things. The man continued, choosing his words with painful precision. "We were informed this morning that Amelia Hallier, wife's connected to an individual who has significant influence over this company's ownership." Ethan stared at him, utterly confused. Connected? How? Silence. Then the words that would change everything. "Your wife is the biological daughter of Aurelius Voss." Ethan laughed, involuntarily, a short, dry, incredulous sound. "I'm sorry, but that's impossible. Aurelius Voss is a trillionaire." The man finished for him, his voice thinning. "Yes, and also the sole owner of this corporation." Ethan stumbled back a step, his mind cracking at the edges. Aurelius Voss was a legend, one of the wealthiest men alive, a ghost of the financial world who rarely appeared in public and controlled an empire of companies through a web of private ownership. Helix Corp was his crown jewel, but the idea that Amelia, his sweet, humble, quiet wife, was the daughter of someone like that was so absurd it felt like a bad joke. Except none of the board members were laughing. The man slid a file across the table to Ethan. Inside was a birth certificate, a DNA confirmation report, and a sealed document stamped with the Voss family crest. "This proof was delivered to us at 6 this morning," the man explained. "Your wife has re-entered the Voss immediate lineage. As such, we have been instructed to give you a temporary leave from the company until her situation is stabilized. Ethan shook his head violently. No, this makes no sense. Amelia never said anything. She doesn't even speak to her family much because she was hidden. The woman beside him said quietly. Ethan froze. Hidden? From who? From threats? From power struggles? From people who wanted to use her? The man leaned forward. Mr. Hale, we advise you to go home. You will receive further instructions by tomorrow. Ethan wanted to scream. He wanted to demand answers until his voice broke. Instead, he walked out of the room, numb, the file clutched in his hand like it was burning him. On the ride home, he kept telling himself there had to be a mistake. Amelia was sweet, loving, and modest. She worked as a freelance illustrator, lived quietly, hated fancy restaurants, and always refused brand-name clothes, even when Ethan offered. She wasn't the daughter of the richest man alive. And if she was, why the hell would she hide it from him? When Ethan reached the apartment, he was surprised to find their door locked and sealed. A new lock, a digital one he didn't recognize. Before he could decide what to do, a black luxury SUV pulled up behind him. A man stepped out tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that looked more expensive than Ethan's entire yearly salary, with an expression carved from stone. Mr. Hale, the man said calmly, we have come to escort you. Ethan felt panic flare. Where is my wife? The man didn't blink. Safe. You will see her now. Ethan hesitated only a second before climbing into the car. The windows were tinted too dark to see out of, and the city sounds faded as the car pulled away. The man handed Ethan a document envelope identical to the one the board had shown him. Your wife was brought to the Voss family estate for protection, he said. Her identity is no longer a secret, and her pregnancy has accelerated certain timelines. Ethan frowned. What time? The man didn't answer. Instead, he added, there is something you should understand before we arrive. Aurelius Voss has enemies. Enemies who would do anything to control his heir. Ethan felt cold dread spill through him. Her heir? The man nodded once. Your child. Ethan's breath caught. What are you saying? The man turned toward him, eyes steady. I am saying that the baby your wife carries will inherit a $1 trillion empire, and there are people who will stop at nothing to obtain that power. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears as the car drove deeper into the unknown. A $1 trillion heir, hidden identities, enemies, and Amelia, trapped in a world Ethan never knew existed. As the gates of the sprawling Voss estate rose before him like the entrance to another realm, Ethan realized the truth with a fear that shook him to his core. His entire life had been built on lies, and now, everything was unraveling. The moment the gates closed behind the SUV, Ethan felt like he'd been swallowed by a world made of silence, wealth, and untouchable authority. The Voss estate was nothing like the rumors. It wasn't a mansion, it was an entire kingdom hidden behind towering walls and guarded roads. The driveway alone stretched long enough to disappear into the distant shadows of ancient trees. And the house, no, the palace rose ahead like something carved from a dream, its windows glowing warmly against the twilight. Ethan stepped out of the car with weak legs, his mind still numb, his chest tight with fear and confusion. The suited man led him into the grand foyer, where the air smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive he couldn't name. Marble floors gleamed beneath massive chandeliers, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, each one carrying the unmistakable Voss features. Sharp eyes, sharp jawlines, cold intensity, the kind of presence that said they owned more than land, they owned destiny. Ethan wondered if his child would someday hang on these walls too. The thought nearly buckled his knees. Before he could ask another question, a woman approached, tall, composed, with steel-gray hair pulled into an elegant twist, wearing a navy suit that radiated authority. Ethan Hale, she greeted with a controlled, almost clinical tone. My name is Marin Voss. I'm the family's chief advisor. Ethan swallowed nervously. Where's my wife? Marin looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then gestured for him to follow. They walked through long hallways, past polished glass doors and elegant lounges, until they reached a quiet wing of the estate that felt less imposing and more human. Marin paused outside a set of double doors. Before you go in, she said gently, you must understand something. Amelia didn't hide her heritage out of shame. She hid it for survival. Aurelius Voss raised her in secret to protect her from rivals who would use her for leverage. When she ran from this life at 18, he didn't chase her. He let her go because she deserved freedom. But now that she is carrying the heir, the family cannot allow her to remain unprotected. Ethan, overwhelmed and hurting, clenched his jaw. She should have told me. Marin's expression softened for the first time. She wanted to, every day, but the moment she told you, your life would have changed, and she feared losing the quiet life she built with you. Ethan looked away, heart twisting painfully. He wanted to be angry, but all he felt was love and fear mixed into a knot inside him. Marin opened the doors. Inside, Amelia sat on a plush couch, hands resting protectively over her small baby bump, her eyes filled with guilt and relief the moment they landed on Ethan. She rushed to him, and he caught her in a desperate embrace, both of them trembling. For a long time, neither spoke. When they finally sat down, Ethan asked softly, Why didn't you tell me? Amelia wiped her tears with shaking fingers. Because my life with you was the only real life I've ever had. If I told you who I was, everything would change. And I needed something. Something untouched by power or greed. She looked down at her belly. But when I got pregnant, everything changed anyway. Ethan cupped her face, his voice cracking. I would never have let anything happen to you. Amelia leaned into his palm. That's exactly why I didn't tell you. You would have been dragged into this world with me. Ethan pulled her closer, emotions choking him. I'm already in it, and I'm not leaving. Before Amelia could respond, the doors opened again, and a presence filled the room with a pressure so intense Ethan felt it in his bones. Aurelius Voss stepped inside. He was older than Ethan expected, late 60s, perhaps, but there was nothing weak or fragile about him. His tall frame was straight, his posture regal, his silver hair trimmed neatly, and his piercing eyes carried the kind of power that could silence a room with a single glance. His expression, cold to the world, softened only when his gaze landed on Amelia. My daughter, he said quietly, and there was a tremor in his voice, subtle but unmistakable. Amelia stood, torn between love and resentment. Father. For a moment, they only stared at one another, years of pain, distance, and longing swirling, unspoken between them. Ethan watched, feeling like an outsider in a moment far bigger than himself. Then Aurelius turned to him. Those cold, sharp eyes studied Ethan with unnerving depth. You are Ethan Hale. Ethan swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Aurelius stepped closer. You love my daughter. It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. More than anything, Aurelius's gaze hardened. Can you protect her? Ethan straightened. With my life, the older man's eyes flickered with some unreadable emotion. You will have to. A silence stretched heavy and tense. Then Aurelius offered something Ethan never expected, his hand. Welcome to the family, Ethan Hale. Ethan shook his hand, feeling the weight of what that promise meant. That night, the couple stayed in a private suite inside the estate. Ethan barely slept, lying awake with Amelia's fingers curled gently around his. She spoke in whispers between tears, telling him things she'd never said before about being hidden away in safe houses as a child, always surrounded by guards, always watched, never getting to choose anything. She confessed that running away at 18 was the first decision she'd ever made on her own, and meeting Ethan had been the second. You are my freedom, she whispered. Ethan held her tighter. And you're my whole world. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew the world outside their room was shifting like tectonic plates preparing to break. The next morning, the storm hit. Ethan was having coffee in the suite sitting area when a sudden alarm echoed through the hallway, sharp, urgent, vibrating the floors. Amelia rushed out of the bathroom with panic in her eyes. Before either of them could speak, Marin burst into the room, breathless. We need to move. Now. Ethan stood quickly. What's happening? Security breach, Marin said, gripping her tablet. A drone attempted to cross the perimeter wall. Armed, someone is looking for Amelia, or, rather, what she's carrying. Amelia paled and instinctively shielded her stomach. Ethan's heart crashed against his ribs. Guards entered the suite, forming a protective circle around them as they were escorted into a fortified safe wing. From the reinforced windows, Ethan glimpsed a security team mobilizing across the grounds. Helicopters scanning the skies, men shouting orders through radios. It wasn't a breach. It was an attack, and it wasn't random. It was targeted. Amelia trembled as she clung to Ethan's arm. They know, she whispered shakily. Someone knows about the baby. We'll keep you safe, Ethan said fiercely, though his own fear hovered like ice in his veins. Hours passed before the estate stabilized, and only then did Aurelius summon them to his private office. This time, the tension in the room felt lethal. Aurelius stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, his voice heavy. The threat will not stop. The world knows I have no heirs. When word spreads that an heir exists, vultures will circle. Some will want to control the child. Others will want the child gone. Amelia winced. Ethan stepped forward. What are you saying? I am saying, Aurelius said gravely, turning with eyes that seemed older than the world, that the only way to protect your child is to bring you both fully into the Voss lineage. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? Aurelius approached them slowly. A public declaration, legal recognition, global announcement. You, Amelia, and the child will become the protected core of the Voss empire. No longer hidden, no longer vulnerable. Amelia's breaths became uneven. But that means losing everything, she whispered. Our quiet life, our freedom, Ethan's job, our privacy. Aurelius nodded sadly. Yes, the price of safety is the loss of anonymity. Then he looked at Ethan, and the price of loving my daughter is carrying this burden with her. Ethan felt the weight of the world settle on his shoulders. A life of secrecy, danger, power struggles, the eyes of billions watching them. But when Amelia's hand slipped into his, trembling, silently pleading for reassurance, he knew his decision was already made. We'll do it, he said quietly. Amelia's eyes filled with tears, fear, love, and something deeper. Aurelius exhaled slowly, relief softening his hardened features. Then we begin preparations immediately. But fate was never patient. Later that night, while the estate prepared for the next steps, Ethan stepped into the hallway to clear his head. to hear muffled voices behind a half-closed door. Marin's voice was tight with urgency. "We can't delay. The threat is escalating faster than anticipated." Another voice, a man responded, tense. "You're asking for a full-scale mobilization. That level of security will draw attention." "It doesn't matter," Marin snapped. "If anything happens to that child, the empire collapses." Ethan froze. Empire collapse. His unborn child. The stakes were bigger than he had ever imagined. And suddenly, he realized something terrifying. Whatever was coming wasn't just a family matter. It was a global war of power, wealth, and legacy. And he and Amelia were standing at the center of the battlefield. The world would not let their child be born peacefully. And tomorrow, everything would change. Ethan barely slept that night, even with the estate secured, armed guards patrolling every hallway, and cutting-edge surveillance humming through the walls. He felt the growing shadow of danger hovering over them like an invisible predator. Amelia rested beside him, curled protectively around her stomach, her breath shallow with anxiety. He stayed awake watching her, promising himself that he would carry whatever this new life demanded even if it crushed him. At dawn, a knock at the door jolted them awake. Aurelius himself entered, dressed sharply in a steel-gray suit despite the early hour. His expression was tight, controlled, but there was urgency beneath the surface. "We need to act sooner than expected," he said without preamble. "Our enemies are moving faster." Ethan sat up, tension gripping his spine. "What happened now?" Aurelius ran a hand through his silver hair. "A group attempted to breach one of our secondary safe houses overnight. They were searching for Amelia." Amelia's face drained of color. "But I haven't been in those safe houses in years." "It does not matter," Aurelius said grimly. "Your existence was the secret. Now the secret is out, and secrets never stay unchased." He sat down across from them. "We will make the announcement today. The world will learn that you are my daughter, that you are expecting the only heir to the Voss Empire, and that any threat against you is a threat against a trillion-dollar dynasty." Ethan felt the magnitude of it like a punch in his chest. Today, the entire world would know. Their faces, their child, their future, everything would be thrown into the brightest and most dangerous spotlight on Earth. Amelia held Ethan's hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Are we even ready for this?" she whispered. Ethan squeezed back gently. "We don't have a choice." Aurelius nodded. "You will not face this alone. Every resource I have will be at your disposal." He stood. "Prepare yourselves. The press conference begins in 2 hours." 2 hours? Ethan and Amelia sat in silence long after Aurelius left, listening to their own unsteady breaths. Then Amelia rested her forehead on Ethan's shoulder. "Do you hate me for dragging you into this?" Ethan wrapped his arms around her. "I walked into this world because I love you. I'm not leaving," she exhaled shakily, nodding against his shoulder, tears soaking into his shirt. After they dressed Amelia in a simple, elegant cream dress, Ethan, in a tailored suit provided by the estate Marin, arrived with 2 guards to escort them to the atrium. As they walked, Ethan noticed something unsettling. Every staff member bowed their head when they passed. Every guard stood straighter. Every maid and advisor looked at Amelia with reverence. She wasn't just his wife anymore. She had become royalty overnight. When the atrium doors opened, a wall of noise hit them, cameras clicking, journalists murmuring, lights flashing like a storm of white fire. The moment they stepped forward, the room fell silent. Aurelius stood at the podium. He looked every bit the titan the world believed him to be, uncheckable, commanding, larger than life. "Today," he began, his voice echoing through the room, "I reveal a truth I have protected for 28 years. He gestured toward Amelia. "This is my daughter, Amelia Voss, hidden for her safety, loved beyond measure." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed furiously. Amelia stood tall, though Ethan felt her trembling slightly beside him. Aurelius continued. "She carries my first grandchild, the future heir to the Voss legacy." The room erupted again, questions, gasps, speculation. Ethan felt the world shift under his feet. He wasn't just Amelia's husband anymore. He was the father of the Voss heir, a target and a shield at the same time. Aurelius raised a hand, silencing the chaos instantly. "Any threat toward my daughter, her husband, or their child," he said with a coldness that chilled even Ethan's blood, "will be met with the full force of the Voss Empire." The message was clear, a declaration of war. After the conference, security escorted them back to the private wing. Amelia collapsed onto the couch, overwhelmed. Ethan sat beside her, holding her close as cameras flashed in his mind like ghosts he couldn't shake off. "It's real now," she whispered. "All of it. The danger, the power, the responsibility." Ethan kissed her forehead. "We'll face it together." But fate had more twists prepared. That afternoon, Marin entered the room, her expression unusually tense. "We have a problem," she said. "There's been a leak." Ethan stood sharply. "What kind of leak?" "A video," Marin said. "Someone released security footage of Amelia at the hospital weeks ago. Someone followed her. They've been tracking her movements long before today." Amelia pressed a hand to her mouth. Ethan's fists clenched with rage. "Who did this?" "We're still investigating," Marin said. "But this was intentional, coordinated, and now reporters and opportunists are gathering outside the main gates." Amelia shook her head. They want the baby. They want information. They'll twist everything. Ethan took her hands. They're not touching you. Or our child. Aurelius entered moments later, anger crackling around him like lightning. You will be moved, he said. Now, the estate is compromised. Where are we going? Ethan asked. Somewhere, no one can reach you. They were loaded into a black armored SUV and escorted by a convoy of security vehicles. Ethan held Amelia close as the cars weaved through private roads, away from the estate and into the mountains. After nearly an hour, the convoy arrived at a remote glass and stone safe house perched above the cliffs, surrounded by pine trees and silence. Inside, the walls were reinforced steel, disguised behind luxury decor. No windows faced the road. No drones could penetrate the defense system. It was a fortress disguised as a retreat. Amelia stepped inside, exhausted and emotionally drained. How long do we stay here? Aurelius, who had followed them, closed the door behind him. Until the threat is neutralized, the next days were suffocating. Amelia's stress rose with every headline online. Ethan's frustration grew as he watched enemies close in like wolves, circling prey. Aurelius worked tirelessly with international security teams, hunting the mastermind behind the breach. Finally, after a week of tension and fear, a breakthrough came. Marin entered the safe house late at night with urgent eyes. We found them, she said. Aurelius looked up sharply. Your brother's former advisor, Marin said bitterly. The same one who left the family in fury years ago. He's been monitoring Amelia for months, planning to expose her to leverage control of the child. Amelia gasped. Why would he want the baby? Aurelius's expression darkened. Power, he wanted the heir to be his puppeteer gone. Ethan felt sick. So what now? Aurelius turned to him. Now, we end this. Within hours, the traitor was arrested. The threat dismantled. The family's enemies backed away as the Voss Empire made it clear that the heir was untouchable. When the danger finally passed, Aurelius returned to the safe house one morning with softer eyes than Ethan had ever seen. It's time to go home, he said. Back at the estate, the atmosphere was peaceful again. Guards relaxed. Staff smiled warmly. The entire house felt transformed, less like a fortress and more like the beginning of a new chapter. Amelia stood in the garden, the sunlight glowing over her belly. Ethan approached her quietly. You okay? She nodded, smiling with watery eyes. I think I finally am. Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his hands over their child. We made it, he whispered. We survived it all. She leaned back into him. And now, our baby gets to grow up safe. Aurelius approached them slowly, his posture slightly humbler than before. I owe you both an apology, he said. Amelia blinked in surprise. For what? Aurelius looked at Ethan. For assuming you were too small for this world. But you protected my daughter when I couldn't. You stood beside her even when everything felt impossible. He placed a gentle hand on Amelia's shoulder. You are not a hidden daughter anymore. You are the future of this family. Tears glimmered in Amelia's eyes. Ethan felt emotion swell in his chest. Then Aurelius placed a hand on Ethan's back. And you, he said quietly, are the kind of man I always hoped she would find. For the first time, Ethan saw not a trillionaire, not a titan of power, but a father grateful, humbled, changed. As the sun set over the Voss estate, Ethan and Amelia stood together hand in hand, Aurelius beside them, forming a united front. Their child unborn, yet already cherished, would enter the world surrounded by love, protection, and unbreakable strength. And though danger would always linger in the shadows, one truth shone brighter than all the wealth in the world. They were a family, a powerful family, a chosen family, and nothing, no enemy, no secret, no empire could ever tear them apart again.